I'd like to begin by acknowledging the land on which Parachute is located. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional territory of the Wendat, the Anishinaabeg, the Haudenosaunee, Métis, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Today, this land is still home to many Indigenous people, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. While we meet today on a virtual platform, we encourage all of you to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands which we call home. From coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this land home. Some housekeeping. Please enter your questions in the Q&A box. If you have any technical issues throughout the webinar, please put those in the chat and we will be able to address those for you. Road safety measures have a broad impact on urban communities, with several benefits ranging from environmental to health. Today, we are exploring the intersections among equity and accessibility, multimodal transportation, health, well-being, and the environment, and their connections to road safety. Safe roads are only possible if we treat the underlying issues as the complex problem it is. At Parachute, we recognize that improving road safety includes changing how we design and use roads and other public spaces to be more accessible and inclusive to other road users beyond drivers. We also recognize that road safety improves when we reduce motor vehicle traffic through strategies such as improved access to public transit, dedicated bike infrastructure, walkable and more connected neighborhoods, and slower, more controlled traffic. All of these provide other benefits as well to communities. By promoting and making multiple forms of transportation available, urban road users can make a shift to using alternative, safer, and more environmentally friendly transport options, such as walking, cycling, wheeling, and public transit. The Decade of Action for Road Safety 2021 to 2030 promotes multimodal transportation and multi-sectoral partnerships and collaboration as an effective approach to make our roads safe and offers an opportunity to amplify our voices towards this goal. Together, we can achieve positive outcomes for our causes and that also achieve safer roads for all. To communicate these ideas to our key stakeholders and partners, Parachute has developed 3 infographics that will be available in early March. These infographics can be used to start a dialogue with your colleagues and politicians to change the way we all think about road safety. So to kick off this webinar, I'm going to introduce our first presenter. Professor John Spence spends most of his time relaxing in the sedentary living laboratory in the Faculty of Kinesiology, Sport and Recreation at the University of Alberta. He's an expert in behavioral medicine and research methods, and he focuses on both the benefits and determinants of physical activity and how physical inactivity and sedentary behavior are related to health. Dr. Spence has studied the broad social determinants and population physical activity patterns. More recently, he has focused on factors that impact mobility and active transportation, as well as the role of policy initiatives such as national strategies for promoting physical activity. Dr. Spence has a strong background in physical activity measurement, meta-analysis, and ecological models of behavior and health. So Dr. Spence, over to you.
Thank you, Pam. So yeah, I was tasked with introducing and discussing briefly the relationship between physical activity and health, and then how that links to active transportation. So hopefully it's not news to you that there is a relationship between physical activity and health. This figure depicts a risk for all-cause mortality. And moving from the left of the figure to the right of the figure, we're going from the lowest levels of physical activity or physical fitness to the highest levels of physical activity and or physical fitness. So basically, at any age, the risk for all-cause mortality decreases as we increase our levels of physical activity and or physical fitness. Now, that doesn't mean we're not all going to die someday, but it just does mean that, as I said, at any age, yeah, the more active we are, the better off we are. And this is consistent across numerous or many studies that have been done. Okay, so physical activity is good for us. What proportion of the population engages in physical activity? Well, in Canada, we see a minority of adults and children engage in what would be considered sufficient levels of physical activity. So that means meeting the current guidelines and recommendations. So for children, it's approximately 40% of children and youth are sufficiently active. But that might be only about 5 to 10 minutes more of activity per day that would be required. And we see a real drop on weekends in children and adolescents. For adults, it's about 45% that meet guidelines. And interestingly enough, during COVID, there was no change noted between 2018 and 2020 in terms of the proportion that were meeting. This was self-reported meeting guidelines, and that was data from StatsCan. Although that's somewhat at odds with what we've seen in many other, either reported in many other countries or in some recent systematic reviews. But anyway, a little bit under 50% would meet guidelines. And then finally, and probably more relevant to some of the discussion today, a useful metric is looking at what proportion are taking approximately 7,500 steps per day. And again, it's around 50% of adults who would do that. So these are Canadian adults. So a way to think about what we are doing in terms of activity on a daily basis is to look at these movement patterns that are depicted here. This is accelerometry data. So this is, the equivalent of a Fitbit or a little device that you might wear on your waist, and it tells us how much people move around on a daily basis. So what's depicted on the left side is by age group, children in the solid dark line, then moving down to younger adults, then older adults in the gray, and then adults 20 to 79 in the sort of dotted line at the bottom. So starting in 7 o'clock in the morning, going through to 9 o'clock at night. And what you'll notice is that, yes, we get up in the morning and we see a significant increase in minutes of sort of moderate to vigorous physical activity that we would associate probably with children going off to school, the adults, parents getting out the door and heading off to work. And then you'll see a bit of a plateau through the middle of the day. And then as we get towards the end of the day, that pattern starts to decrease. And one argument here is that really much of our movement in the day is related to what we would consider perhaps being those significant transition points that are most likely related to transporting ourselves from one place to another. On the right side of the figure here, you see weekends and weekdays. And going back to the point I made before about children on weekends, you see on weekdays, we engage in more moderate to vigorous physical activity than we do on weekends. So this is across thousands of people over the country. And this pattern you would see in pretty well any Western sort of more economically developed country around the world. It's a fairly consistent pattern. So the weekday versus weekend pattern is again explained by that we have places we're going in our day more often on the weekday than on the weekend. And we see this with children in the summer compared to when they're in school. So again, my argument or point would be on a daily basis, going to places, i.e. work, school, is resulting in us moving more than not. All right, so what are the factors that are related to why and how people are physically active on a daily basis? If we look between countries, some of those factors are things like climate, latitude, environment, the economic development level of economic development in a country. So for instance, countries lower in economic development, there's more manual labor going on, perhaps less developed transportation systems. So people are engaging in more physical activity just to move around and put food on their table. Climate will explain types of activities you might engage in. We don't do a lot of downhill skiing in Fiji, but in BC, perhaps we're doing a lot more alpine skiing here, as an example. Within countries, there's a whole host of factors. These are sort of the social and environmental factors. Things like socioeconomic and demographic factors, things like gender, employment status, built environment, the physical environment, crime and safety, policy, bylaws, weather. Those are all contributing factors to whether people will engage in physical activity. And these are aside from more individual cognitive things like motivation, goals, and so forth. All right, so that leads into, and stepping off from that notion of crime, personal safety, and so forth, I like this summary presented in a paper by Branian and Callis, where they were looking to see what information was available around road collision fatality risks in Canada. So they summarized across numerous surveys that have been done over the years, sources like the Canadian Community Health Survey that come from Stats Canada, the census, and so forth. And a few things that come out of there that are consistent, again, with things that we know from other sources of information. Men are more likely to cycle than women. Women are more likely to walk than men. Men are more likely to experience injuries, fatality, and/or fatalities as a result of active commuting. But then gender differences in bicycling tend to attenuate where safer infrastructure is present or where more people are cycling overall. So as a lead into the discussion and what my colleagues are going to be talking about here today, we can see that the policies and infrastructure can have an impact and address or potentially ameliorate some of the barriers that people may experience that would be related to some of those other factors that I talked about on my previous slide. So that's going to be my stepping off point here today. But before I do that, I just want to give a quick plug for information that will soon be released coming out of something called the Canadian National Active Transportation Survey that was conducted by myself and the Canadian Fitness Lifestyle Research Institute. And some of the reports that will be coming out of there will be discussing in much more detail things like prevalence of active transportation, perspectives on policy initiatives that support active transportation, and as sort of a follow-up to the paper that I just mentioned, reporting on collisions and injuries while engaged in active transportation. So I thank you for your attention, and hopefully I have briefly summarized that physical activity is important for us, that I would argue that active transportation at a population level is probably one of the most critical sources of activity for many Canadians, and that we need to facilitate that. It's important for us to have safe and supportive infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Spence. And a webinar would not be complete without a furry friend joining us at all. So thanks for that. Our next speaker, presenter, I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Meghan Winters, who is a professor in the Faculty of Health Sciences at Simon Fraser University and a CIHR Applied Public Health Chair in Gender and Sex in Healthy Cities. She is a population health researcher interested in the links among health, transportation, and city design. She leads the Cities Health and Active Transportation Lab, which focuses on ways that cities and their infrastructure can play a role in promoting healthy and safe transportation for people of all ages and abilities. She works in close collaboration with cities and communities to conduct research and create tools that address real-world challenges. So Meghan, over to you.
Great. Thanks so much for the invitation and having me here today. And I'm standing up, Dr. Spence. So I'm joining from the unceded traditional territories of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations in the area known as Vancouver, colonially. And I think I'm talking today about transportation and equity, road safety, and a really important reflection is the need to address the unintended issues of daily travel for Indigenous peoples in Canada. Action and attention is needed given the role of transportation in the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls crisis. And we also know that Indigenous people in Canada are more likely not to have access to cars for transportation, yet many of them live in areas with some of the least safe environments for walking and cycling. So there's a lot of work to be done. It's not my area of specialty, but I know of many projects underway and getting started, and I think it's an important thing to have at the forefront of our conversations. So today I am speaking to work underway with part of my CIHR, in fact, Applied Public Health Research Chair. This is the Reach Cities program, and the goal of this program that'll be going on for the next 6 years is to advance research, tools, and partnerships that can increase social equity in our cities. It's work that I'm doing together with cities and city partners, meeting them where they're at and trying to support them in the next tools and steps they might need to move forward. So just the case for why gender and social equity in cities matter. We know that women and gender diverse people face many challenges related to mobility, transportation, housing, childcare, safety, the list keeps going, and face sort of disproportionate barriers around this. And so just to put us all on the same table, I see an equitable city as one where all residents have fair access to and can participate in the life of a city. And that wouldn't be the case in many of our cities today. So one of the things that the Reach Cities program did this past year is to generate a research brief about transportation and women in cycling. So I come into this work via transportation, and those on the call will know that transportation is a very gendered experience, and Dr. Spence has introduced us to that. So when we did this review, which is available as a link for our website and hopefully fits this kinds of audiences that are here, the main themes that came out about women in cycling, and we already know women cycle less, but the main sort of themes and barriers from the literature had to do with personal safety. And so that would be about harassment and personal safety issues, and then infrastructure. So that's how safe is actually the roads infrastructure there, but also some real structural and social factors at play, being those gendered responsibilities and realities that are still unfairly carried by women and gender diverse people, and also the gender as a bodily experience. And so this brief is available for people who want to look closer into it. And as we think about those deeper experiences, so a lot of times we talk about infrastructure, and that's one piece of what's happening here, but those sort of social and structural forces are important things for us to consider. I think that intersectionality is a really valuable way for framing this in transportation and road safety or other population health work. And it often helps to start with a visual. So my next few slides are going to be about visuals, but this is a wheel of power or privilege, and I find it's one visual that is useful for intersectional work and bringing people along on this story. So intersectionality examines how systems of oppression interact with each other to shape experiences and opportunities. It explicitly looks at social identities and the intersection of social identities and the unique experiences. And it also explicitly names the processes of oppression, discrimination, privilege, and power that result in different lived experiences, opportunities, and health outcomes. And so it allows you to sort of take that thinking a step deeper. So sometimes we talk theoretically like this, but sometimes resonate or land with the audience. And so one of the things in Reach Cities that we're doing in response to that kind of feedback is to use vignettes as a tool to communicate about equity and as a tool to show how cities are experienced by people with different social identities. So one example is a tale about Abda. And Abda is not a real person. This is just a narrative that we've created that may reflect real experiences. So Abda is a newcomer to Canada, arriving 6 months ago with her 3 children. She doesn't currently have a job and has limited financial resources. She needs to secure affordable childcare to find a job. That's hard to come by. And she also wishes there were public spaces close to her home where she could take her children to play. But the roads around her apartment have heavy traffic, which make it hard to get to parks and community centers with 3 children without a car. So when we use these kinds of vignettes in a presentation or a workshop, what we're trying to do is prompt thinking also about what kinds of programs and policies can help in a case of ABDA. So there's structural forces, but there's also things that we can do every day in decision making, sort of 15% solutions that can help. And examples that would come up in a case of ABDA might be that ABDA did discover that transit is free for children under 12 in her area. Now she can use this mode of transport to get around to communities or library centers. Or that she found out from someone in her housing unit that there's a path around a nearby cul-de-sac, which gives her a safe walk to a local school that has a playground, and now she has a safe way to get there by foot. So this kind of vignette, and we have a whole series of them, is one way to do that communication. Another communication is through graphics, and I bet that almost everybody on this call might have seen the green graphic in the top corner where we try and use visuals to emphasize the difference between equality and equity. But what you might not know maybe is that new visuals have just come out by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation that I think are really nice innovations or updates to the visual that was out there, and I hope you'll be able to use them in your work. You know, they had feedback that this could be a more inclusive, especially around racial and ethnic diversity, disability inclusion, and demonstrating that there's different community conditions. So this is the updated one that still focuses sort of on that bicycling narrative, but you can see that sort of environmental aspect within it, as well as the inclusion and other aspects of inclusion. But maybe this group is also interested in this other graphic that came out, which is not bicycle centric, but actually I think is a really nice tool sort of for the parachute and road safety audience, where now we're on a curb, and what you can see is the different characteristics of the individuals in their environment. So we see curb cuts. We see accessible pedestrian signals, and we really see those differences to getting everybody across the road on a reasonable time. So this might be something you want to draw on. Back to the sort of the Change for Good Roads report, I want to get back to sort of that road design and make clear that the problem is still with the paradigm on how we're using road space. In Vancouver, 34% of our land area is taken up by roads right of way. And so it's thinking about how we prioritize people using that 1/3 of the land base that's around. And I often remind audiences that we all make transportation choices every day for every trip, but that we don't all have the same set of choices. So if we pick driving, which is the default in our car-centric country, we sometimes forget about the people who can't drive. So whether it's age, the young or the old, whether it's disability, whether it's income, cultural norms, or climate reasons or other sustainability reasons. When we want to plan for people and for all people, it often means that we need to that those in power need to consider the experiences of people who are very different than they are. And they need to hear the voices of people who are different than have their experiences, and they need to in order to start doing things differently. And we see that come up in road design. So places like these pedestrian scrambles make clear priority the safety for people walking, and that from design from the outset, it was people walking that they were thinking about as they did this. We also see bicycle infrastructure connecting people to the places they need to go, and major investments in cities across the country, and big announcements in Edmonton this past year, I would say most recently, but building that out. Current in the discussion, and maybe the third speaker will pick up on this as well, is that not all infrastructure is the same, of course, and design guidance now that would encourage us to build these all ages and abilities bicycle networks, or there may be other language that you like there, but higher quality facilities that are going to welcome more people and more different people to use cycling. So just in my final minutes, I want to conclude on sort of some work we have undergoing right now. So there's decades of excellent research on what works for road safety. I want to be clear that we have evidence on effective interventions for road safety. But the struggle continues to be in implementation of them and getting it on the ground. And if equity is our goal, or thinking about transportation equity, it needs to be baked into the plan from the outset if we're going to get changes happening on the ground. And the city partners that I work with, my teams work with across the country, we were hearing repeatedly that they had trouble figuring out how best to get started. So they didn't know, it was a big problem, but they didn't know how to move forward on it. So with support from the Canadian Institute of Health Research and MyTax, we started a scan of municipal equity policies to identify patterns in how cities were moving forward with equity. So from peer cities, We published an article in Plan Canada, and we're currently doing interviews with transportation professionals across the country to understand how these equity policies, larger frameworks, translate into transportation planning and practice, and to share what's working and what's a challenge. High level, because this is what people ask us for all the time, just a snapshot of what we're learning, and some steps that some Canadian cities are taking in case these work for others. So without too much detail, I mean, Edmonton has formally adopted gender-based analysis plus. There's an example there. This would method, and this would be a series of questions that attempts to apply intersectionality in action. Again, none of these things are perfect, I would say, but there's sort of successes and steps that you might go within them. Edmonton also is really explicitly recognized a need to collect disaggregated data. So cycling demographic data, when we're doing counts, often doesn't have demographic data associated with it. And it's hard to get a sense of who's using different kinds of facilities without those kinds of data. We see cities changing their engagement strategies, taking steps to remove barriers so that you're not just hearing from people who are privileged enough or have the time and education to go to public meetings. And hopefully that those are continuing. A lot of those shifts happened during COVID, and that those continue to be common practices. And then an example in New West is that they're completing an equity audit of the city policies and services. So an across the board sort of internal audit to look at how equity is being considered, and they're resourcing that. 4 more just quickly. Some cities, including New West, are dedicating an office and resourcing an office within the municipality around equity with permanent staff. Some cities are preparing department level equity action plans. So an example would be Halifax there, or tools to evaluate their own work and work practices around inequities. And then the final one I would highlight was that some cities are adding equity criteria to funding and procurement mechanisms, and Saskatoon's an example. So we're going to be presenting this kind of work actually at CITE in CARSP if anyone's there in June to take this further. And I'm certainly not saying that every city needs to do any of these, but each city sort of knows which things would be tractable kinds of changes that they could put into place in the short term, and that these might be models for that. So with that, I encourage people, there's more resources on the website for our project, or I'm happy to take questions afterwards. Thank you.
Thanks, Megan. And thank you. I was just going to remind the audience to enter their questions in the Q&A because we'll be allowing for some time. We'll have maybe about 15 minutes to get some questions answered, and those resources are really valuable. People can check them out. Just in case those on the call are not familiar, CARSP is the Canadian Association of Road Safety Professionals conference that they are doing in collaboration with actually ITE, I guess they're changing their name in Winnipeg. So I am going to introduce our last but not least presenter, and I think it's going to be an interesting information for our audience to hear about. So Arcy Canumay is the bicycle mayor of Waterloo. I love that title, which is part of a global initiative to promote the bicycle as a key solution to complex city challenges. He collaborates with people and organizations in Waterloo, Ontario, to create an environment to encourage more people to ride their bike. The Bicycle Mayor Network was founded in 2016 by BYCS Amsterdam. No surprise there that Amsterdam is a leader in this. Arcy is also the TravelWise program manager at Sustainable Waterloo Region. He collaborates with member organizations to encourage their team members to sustainably commute to work by riding transit, cycling, walking, or carpooling. He brings a wealth of experience in active transportation, community development, and electric mobility initiatives in Waterloo and other cities in Canada. Arcy, over to you.
Thank you. And thank you for the invitation. I really appreciative of the invitation, but also with just the first 2 speakers, I learned a lot. And also, Dr. Spence, I'm standing, so you can see me move left and right easily, as opposed to sitting down. And as mentioned, I'm Arcy, the bicycle mayor of Waterloo, and it's something that is really conversation starter. I remember starting as the bicycle mayor in 2020, and just emailing the real mayor of Waterloo and saying, "Hey, I'm like quote unquote the bicycle mayor. I want to meet you and introduce the program." So that started my journey. The title, it's not elected, it's endorsed. So I was endorsed by 5 or 6 leaders in the community, and I submitted those endorsements to BYCS or bikes, and I became the bicycle mayor in 2020. Speaking of BYCS or bikes, as mentioned, it's an organization out of the Netherlands in Amsterdam, and bikes, its vision is really striving towards 50 by 30, which is 50% of all urban trips by bicycle by 2030. From the day that I was having a conversation with them, and the way that they presented it, it's really like a strategic pathway, stating this bold statement in terms of like, this is what we would like in cities around the world. And now we have like with bicycle mayors, we have 150 bicycle mayors around the world. And the mission is to nurture, strengthen, and scale community-led cycling initiatives globally through a focus on what we call human infrastructure. That's an interesting term that was researched by bikes, but also shared with the community. And it touches on key areas that was actually already mentioned by our speakers earlier. And with bikes, one of the cycling initiatives is the Bicycle Mayor Network. And it was founded in 2016. Our first bicycle mayors from Amsterdam is Anne Luton, and she's the one in orange on the left there. And from that start, I mentioned there's now 150. We have 4 or 5 in Canada. We're actually looking for more bicycle mayors, and the country that has the most is actually India, with close to 50 out of the 150 bicycle mayors around the world. With bicycle mayors, we really focus on our local like city or town, wherein we identify what are the core problems, challenges that is stopping people to bike, to go out and bike around the city, mainly like to go around, to commute, and from there go outside and have that conversation with the community. I mentioned about being fortunate of meeting the mayor of Waterloo, and having that conversation in terms of what he thinks of some of the initiatives, some of the challenges that the city has and how it can be addressed. I also went out with the community, like joining bike rides, going on different like group rides, and just starting with a conversation. And from there, I was able to identify some of the priorities. Definitely one priority that keeps coming back is how can we improve our physical infrastructure? And that's one thing that I definitely was working on, collaborating with the region. It's interesting here in Waterloo because we have a regional level of government, and also we have 3 cities and 4 townships. And with the infrastructure, there's a main road that's maintained by the region, which connects to like another arterial road that's managed by the city. So it gets tricky, and that coordination, that collaboration, it's a continuous process of planning and having that conversation with different like stakeholders, depending on if there's an issue in terms of safety. I mentioned about human infrastructure, and that is really like developing initiatives that reinforce cycling cultures and the ability for everyone to access and perceive cycling as a viable, safe, empowering mode of transportation. one of the examples given by the lead researcher Lucas was like, imagine a city that that has really great infrastructure, but residents would see the infrastructure but actually don't know how to bike. And so the human infrastructure side is having awareness and education being available in the city. There will be awareness and education for the younger population in the city, but also for the adults, for the older population, so that when they look at the infrastructure now, hey, there's a bike lane like near my house, and like I've learned or I know how to bike, so now I can use it. So that's one important like measure, a soft measure with regards to the human infrastructure of cycling. There's also stimulation and access, wherein we immediately maybe think of like you can buy a bike, everyone has a bike. But really some people, one is because they didn't learn, they don't have a bike, or maybe they can't afford a bike. An immigrant who just came to Canada, just trying to find work, might not be able to like just afford a bike. But now, like for example, here in Waterloo region, the region will be launching a shared micromobility system springtime. And so it opens up that part of stimulation and access, so that when there's a shared micromobility station near your house, near your workplace, then you will be able to use it. You'll be able to rent it for a few minutes and then be able to go to your place of work, school, and so on. So with Waterloo specifically, here are some examples of some activities that I work with the community in terms of just that human infrastructure side. Like in 2020, the region and the cities together with advocates. So it's a dream combination. So you have government official elected, but also you have staff from the different levels, from the region and the cities, having that conversation together with advocates to establish temporary COVID bike lanes across 3 of our cities, Kitchener, Waterloo, and Cambridge. And it was approved by the region, and we established a 30-kilometer temporary COVID bike lane. And it really changed the city we're in, or the region we're in. A lot more people were biking. There's one advocate who's a teacher, and his school was beside one of the temporary bike lanes. And students keep like sharing stories, knowing that he's like regularly biking to school. His students were saying, hey, I'm now biking to school because there's a temporary bike lane that takes me directly through Westmount, which is like a 4-lane like high-speed road. And now I'm biking through Westmount because there are actually 2 lanes that I can use going to school. And we've seen at a minimum, I think, a 40% to as much as double the number of people biking over that period of time wherein the temporary COVID bike lanes were available. And one great thing here is just, I remembered, is like one of the advocates is now the mayor of Waterloo. There's a new mayor of Waterloo. And I remember her leading the way, or one of the leaders in terms of that conversation with the region during the start of COVID. So that's, I think, one big learning with this particular example we're in. It's really a collaboration between advocates and elected officials, but also staff within the region, but also within the city. The second one is in 2021 and 2022, I've been having conversations with Immigration Waterloo region and the KW Multicultural Center. They were interested in learning more. They found out like, hey, you're the bike mayor. What's that? So it's again a conversation starter. And yeah, we just looked at like an opportunity. They had new program that launched in 2021, which is Racial Equity WR. And I said, yeah, let's like bike together, have a conversation about racial equity, invite the community. And we met at like Victoria Park, we biked around, had a conversation. And they really liked how you can bike around the city. And they said, why don't we do more events? So that's, I think, one important thing that I've learned with the community is looking at different groups, different organizations that will open things up in terms of like cycling. And for them, it's in a way an eye-opener. They didn't know that, hey, I can really bike around Waterloo or around Kitchener or Cambridge. And so we're helping them in terms of identifying areas where it's relatively safe for like new cyclists. And then I also introduced them to this new shared micromobility that will be coming soon. So they're very, very interested in that area. There's that photo I just wanted to highlight on the rightmost, which is slow bike race. That was we were running the slow bike race during the KW Multicultural Center. So it's a chance to one is have fun, but two is also have those conversation in terms of cycling, the status of cycling in our city, in our region. And during that time, that was last year, 2022, the city of Kitchener was already started the construction of the cycling grid within downtown Kitchener. So it's a totally separate cycling grid within downtown Kitchener. And so I had a number of conversations with people. Hey, what's happening there in that area? There was a portion near Victoria Park that was already completed, and they see it, and a lot of people really liked it. And so that's a great example. And I just encourage them, hey, why don't you try like biking in the cycling grid? With the excitement, around 2021, I had a question like, I'm the bicycle mayor of Waterloo, but why just focus on Waterloo? So what I learned from the community, what I learned from bikes, and actually from other bicycle mayors around the world, I tried to share with like Kitchener and Cambridge. To be honest, it's very easy because it's part of the region. So it's like working with, again, staff and advocates. But now also having conversations with advocates in Guelph, like the Guelph Coalition of Active Transportation, another awesome organization that, like, I just said, hey, this is during COVID, it's 2020. I just said, hey, let's bike around Guelph and let's have a conversation. This is what we've done in Waterloo region, and they also shared what they've done in Guelph. We went through areas where there's really good cycling infrastructure, and also London, Ontario. I biked with the bicycle mayor of London, and also going through, like, having a conversation because we're both bike mayors. During that time, we were both new bike mayors, and so we shared different our experiences, the challenges of like starting as a bike mayor, and just being able to identify some things that are maybe similar in our cities, but also the different challenges that we encounter, but also the solutions. A more recent one is Sarnia, and I'm really excited with Sarnia, the city of Sarnia, because it's one of the cities wherein the city staff works closely with advocates, which is like, really, the city staff will just join us in a bike ride. So when we had our bike ride, we were riding with the city staff that was planning for like future infrastructure and so on. So Sarnia, I think, is a really great city to watch out for in the future and to bike. I'm now working with two organizations there. One is focused on the physical infrastructure, so working with city staff, as I mentioned. The other one is more for the human infrastructure, which is really to promote cycling. And that organization started as like having a road bike a race or a community race called BIG, or the Blue Water like International Grand Fondo. So from a Grand Fondo biking like 50, 100 kilometers, they want to make Sarnia really bicycle friendly. And so now working with them, collaborating with them and sharing what we've learned here in Waterloo region, and identifying what maybe they can apply also in Sarnia for like bicycle active transportation around the city. With all the like interesting like projects, excitement, working with different cities, I was really looking forward to this year because one is I'm looking for a new bike mayor here in Waterloo. So if you know someone here that was interested to become a bicycle mayor, but December really changed it for me because it was eye-opening. We're during the middle of December, a really good friend was in an accident, and then I found out, this is from the biking lawyer website, that there were actually 9 reported incidents for both pedestrians and cyclists that in KW. And so it was, I mentioned, like an eye-opener, but also the importance of road safety. You can see it with the photo here. It's like, is this a road? It's looks like a highway. It has four lanes and the middle lane there. But one thing I realized is the importance of, like, with human infrastructure and what I'm doing as a bike mayor, it's important to really link or to weave road safety into all the effort. Like one example is working with Immigration Waterloo Region and KW Multicultural Center. I've discussed safety with them a number of times, but I think presenting it in a way as like with the Parachute Vision Zero is very important. Also with the different like strategic focus areas shown here, the key elements can be applied with, as a bike mayor, what I can like I can do moving forward, working with the community. And it will be important in terms of moving forward or moving the needle is discussing with bikes, but also discussing with other bike mayors around the world in terms of the importance of really connecting or weaving road safety in what we do. So thank you for the time. And as I mentioned earlier, like, we're looking for a bicycle mayor here in Waterloo for later this year, who will hopefully take my place. But also, if you know someone around you yourself in your city, but someone else who might be interested in becoming a bicycle mayor, feel free to reach out. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much. We've got a couple of questions, and I had a couple of questions, and you just answered one of mine, which is, you know, anyone could get involved with the Bicycle Mayor Network, and I think you said one of the words that will encourage a lot of people to become part of this is fun. I mean, that's you know, and John, you were talking about, you know, the physical activity. I think as human beings, we want to do the right things and be safe while we're doing it, but the ultimate is we want to enjoy what we're doing. And so you know, that is a key piece that I've heard throughout the 3 presentations is you can have the physical infrastructure in place, but as Megan, you demonstrated very well with those different bike lane designs, there is good design and bad design. And even if you design something that, you know, is a bike lane, you know, if you're not involving the end users in telling you how they experiencing that, you know, their interest and involvement and physical activity may not, follow that design. So one of the questions that came in was around immigrants, that we talked about, that new Canadians, that they don't consider biking, cycling as a safe way to commute, or even as a way to commute, but especially in Canada and unusually in BC these days, during the winter. And having the bike infrastructure that is accessible in the good weather, when the bike lanes are cleared, you have to have the priority to clear those lanes so that they can be used in the weather that is, winter, ice, snow, that kind of thing. So how does that tie into, and Meghan, maybe I'll start with you, how does that issue tie into making this a viable option for commuting?
Sorry, I was going to speak to the immigrants, but I think you also want me to speak to the winter. Can I do an immigrant comment
you
first?
You can, absolutely.
Okay, excellent. So when I saw this, I thought about, we want to create a safe environment so that then people do get on their bikes, they can get around, and we can encourage them to have joy while they do that. So the infrastructure needs to go down, but that it's also important to have tailored and supportive programs and opportunities to do that sort of promotion, enabling, and make it fun. I'm aware that the Public Health Agency has funded a project across Nova Scotia, maybe it's Toronto and Vancouver, that is called Bike Host. And so it matches up mentors with new immigrants who are interested in the program, and puts them sort of on a program where they go out on rides together, and they sort of show them the ropes and they show them the ways. And I would say that they could also show them something about how to ride in different conditions as they do that. And so it's really a matchup, and I was pleased to hear the Public Health Agency was supporting that kind of program, which had started in a few places in the Peel region, et cetera, and was able to really scale it into different settings to meet people where they're at, and to see which part of the program was working particularly well. I rode in today on an e-bike, and it was a very dangerous commute, because in the city of Vancouver, we don't have the same we're not quite as primed to account for the snow and adjust for the snow. But I did see yesterday that the snow clearing was happening, and that it is a priority. The bike lanes are one of the priority routes, and I did see the machine out yesterday. I wish they could have also salted so that it lasted overnight and did not create the conditions for the morning. So I think that sort of completed feedback, and making sure that we're, ensuring that it's both those sidewalks and the cycleways that are plowed.
Thanks. Yeah, I think that, yes, we have to think about all of those steps. John, you coming from the physical activity sector, how do we get the sectors working more collaboratively? Because we share many of the same goals for maybe different reasons. We're coming at it from a bit of different perspectives. But do you feel like the people working in these different areas, like physical activity, road safety, urban planning, social supports like Immigrant New Canadian supportive agencies, do you see that they are making those connections? What's been your experience?
Yeah, I think you see it happen in some instances. And one example would be around sustainability and climate change, addressing climate change. So the traditionally on the physical activity side, it might have been sort of a health focus, and perhaps others who are advocating for climate change, addressing climate change, if some of the solutions involve avoiding carbon emissions and people engaging in more active transportation, it doesn't really matter the overall goal if some of the solutions are in common. So I've seen more examples and evidence of looking around and say, okay, how can we collaborate, partners, so that we have some consistent messages with perhaps different goals, but the same solutions. And climate change, sustainability is definitely one. I think the safety one is definitely another. Road safety for sure would be another one. I do work also around trying to consider what what's transportation going to look like 50 years from now? And again, how are people going to engage with that? And sort of the whole movement on e-vehicles and so forth. And if we ever get to the point of having autonomous vehicles, And if it's so convenient for people, is that going to impact their choices of, oh, I'm not going to walk a kilometer, 1,500 meters to go somewhere. I'll just pop in some vehicle that's just zooming by. So, yeah, I see examples of it, and I would say the sustainability is one where most recently I'm seeing quite a lot of sort of coalescing happening.
Yeah, because it's a process of people realizing how connected all of these issues are, and how the solutions that we can find can actually be valuable to multiple areas. We've got a couple of comments about, wishing, Toronto could be included in this group. People from the city do join rides, but every bike lane win is really hard fought, and in some way just barely won. And another comment is talking about, starting to do more for cycling, but then they make decisions and put infrastructure on one side of the street that has lots of driveways and side streets. And so I think that, what does success, RC, look like for you when we, think about road safety and physical activity and all of those things? I talked recently to someone who said, the metric will be more women on public transit and using multimodal transportation options. That's kind of a key indicator that you're building infrastructure and you're, I guess, communicating that this is a viable option for folks. But what would success look like for you when you think about all the cities that are considering or engaging in this Bike Mayor initiative?
The success would be the Bike Mayor and but really the advocates being able to have that conversation with the city or town or region, and identify that active transportation will be a priority. With the Waterloo region, just please check out climateactionwr.ca. So for our region, we have a strategy called Transform WR, and what we've done is we've identified active transportation, or transform the way we move is number one, and active transportation supported by transit. And as a community, we're working together toward that goal. I mentioned about Kitchener doing they're now halfway in the construction of their the downtown cycling grid. They'll do the other half this year, and they'll be connecting to other neighborhoods. Similar in a way also what Waterloo's doing, though we don't have like our uptown cycling grid, but there's more safe and separated bike lanes. But it's important that the engineers and the planners are using or are designing it in such a way that it's really world class. Like we look at the Netherlands, there are some aspects there that's already being used in North America. But I think if we bring it closer to like really a separated, safe infrastructure, then there's a chance for more people to bike. If it's a separated, safe infrastructure during winter, it has to be maintained. And we've seen that in Finland. We're in a city like Oulu, similar to cities here in Ontario, lots of snow, but lots of people biking because the infrastructure is safe, separated, and maintained during winter. Kids just bundle up, and there's so many kids still biking to school. And so the success for me is really that we're in as a city, and I really like the collective action we're in. I can do it myself. Even the advocates can do it themselves, but it's really different organizations, the region, in our case, region, and then the cities would have to be really active in doing it, and be able to work together for the physical side, the physical infrastructure, but also that human infrastructure side of educating you road users and so on.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I think that's the theme for one of the major themes that I've heard today. And this is, you know, a conversation that we could go on for a lot longer than this. But thank you, all three of you, for joining us today. I'm going to wrap up and let people know there's been some questions about, will this recording be available? Yes, the recording will be available in the next week or so. And you can take a look at the recording, share it with your colleagues. All the slides will be on the recording as well. I do want to let people know that on Tuesday, March 14th, Parachute will be launching Change for Good Roads, a limited term podcast that will bring together some of the best thinkers in Canada to discuss what are good roads. So check us out. We will be the podcast will be found wherever you listen to podcasts, so Apple and Spotify in particular. And if you're sharing information on the podcast, if you can use the hashtag Change for Good Roads when you share it with others or on social media. We're going to be releasing new episodes on a monthly basis, the second Tuesday of the month for the rest of 2023. So again, thank you to all our presenters for sharing your expertise. Also, thank you to everyone who joined us today for your ongoing support to achieve our goal of 0 serious injuries and deaths on our road. This webinar was supported by Desjardins Insurance and by Transport Canada's Enhanced Road Safety Transfer Payment Program. A reminder to please complete the survey to provide us with your feedback. It will pop up when you end the webinar. And thank you, everybody. And again, have a great rest of the day.